Okay, so I think it's just gonna be under 20 minutes, and I think I'm gonna weave in some questions that I want to propose to people, and just a context for my practice. But I just want to quickly say that much of my work is about exploring ideas of kinship and particularly the fluidity between indigeneity and migration in the US. And I realized that in our meetings, how sort of, unfortunately or fortunately, how US centric my work is. Um, but I want to start with a poem and go into slides, and then the questions will sort of reveal themselves. I was born of blue, the blue womb, crying into another matter when airborne grieves. In grief, blue breathes. I wear her. She's formed of an iridescent flower, pleasurable top a vat. How does an African play the blues? My friend, the jazz trumpetist, asks himself. An immigrant from Nigeria, he grieves the maladies of grandmothers and grandfathers whose secretion have replenished the soils of the earth. He grieves the blue distance through vibrations. I asked Blue, where does blue come from? Blue secretes tears, forming fluids that hold the earth. The stench of sail urine I collect from my love and me to leach blue's secret. The people of the blue say that grandfather's eyebrows gave form to the sacred plant, the blue that gave birth to a connected world, and severed our relatives at the same time. How does a Hmong girl play the blues when she knows nothing of it? Because grandmother dragon lost the blue in her perpetual blindness and rigid silence. Blue lives in the clutter of our womb, a wound. So that's a working poem I wrote about the plant and color and dye, indigo, that I work with. But I use it in sort of like an organic fructose method. I don't use it in a traditional natural dye method, though I've learned to do that in Oaxaca. So this is a piece that came from that blue pot. So all the back was, or the piece was dyed from that blue pot, and then I painted atop of it. This is my grandmother, who is a Hmong woman from southwest China, but assimilated into Han Chinese family, or married into a Han Chinese family, and then immigrated to Taiwan. And because of, various anti-indigenous or anti-other sentiments, she was always ashamed of being a minority or an ethnic minority or different than Han. So therefore, my father and I don't really know anything about our heritage. So my question for you to sort of think through connection and kinship is, where do you come from? What does this place smell, taste, sound, look, and feel like? What is the story of your family? How does your origin story give you magic? I don't know if you want to screenshot this or write this down, but a lot of my work, looks into essentially how globalized industry has robbed us of our, relationship to nature. Are you still there? I can't see. Oh,
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so how industrial, global industry has robbed us of our understanding of nature and what's natural. And, various degrees of robbery, right? Like if you have more privilege and more money, there are different ways that you can have access to nature and to the land and to the earth. But if you are a person of color or Black or Indigenous or in the global South, you know, you have different access to land and power. And so my question to that, or my answer to that, was going to Guilin, China, which is where my paternal grandmother is from. And this is the Lijiang, the Li River. It's a beautiful place. And this is the exact site of my grandmother's birthplace, and you can see that it's already been dammed. But in the sort of quest of trying to find out where I came from, I sort of realized the kind of futility in all of that. Because if you look at this scene, you see so many different plants, you see different flora and fauna and trees, and, you know, different entities make up this picture, which really revealed to me just like how fluid a single place can be, and really prompted me to sort of make connections with this like sort of concept of an ever-evolving landscape. And this is my grandmother's siblings' kids' homes. So I don't really know what that relationship is in English, but this is their home, and this is where they harvest bamboo and they sell the bamboo that they harvest. And so that trip kind of became or grew into this installation, which was at the John Michael Kohler Art Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where there happened to be a large population of Hmong refugees that resettled after the Secret War and the Vietnam War. And my family has no real, we didn't go through that resettlement process. But in Sheboygan, which is where this museum is, they collected a lot of story cloths that the Hmong women made in these resettlement camps in the 70s. And so that cloth, this thing here, is sort of like an allusion or alluding to that lineage of textile making. And then this was a painting that I made in response to that. And this is a piece inspired by Miao textiles or Hmong Miao textiles. I dyed all of this with indigo, with the organic vat, with the same vat that I showed you earlier. And I wove this basket out of pine needles, and I collected a bunch of different things. And each thing has a specific meaning. For instance, this pot right here, I dug natural clay, or I harvested my own clay and then processed it myself, and then made this pot. So a lot of this, it's called SCOBY. This piece is called SCOBY after my love for brewing kombucha. And I also realized that many people within this residency also brew kombucha, so that's really cool. But I'm interested in sort of regenerative practice over a sustainable one, because sustainability, I think, really speaks to capital in ways that are kind of besides the point. But regeneration, I feel like, is the closest thing to natural, and already the earth is sort of doing it, although obviously because of climate change, we're not really allowing for that to happen.
I'm sorry, I missed that part. The climate change doesn't allow what to happen?
Oh, I just said because the earth is naturally regenerative, but because of the way climate change is going, we're not really allowing for that regeneration to happen.
Oh, thank you.
And this is my second question or proposition to the group, which is, if you think about in your own research and in your own practice, and the communities that you're a part of. If care for and asking permission from the historically disenfranchised and disempowered were centered as social priorities, how might your world and our world be different? And so I grew up in San Gabriel, California, which is in Los Angeles County in Southern California. And post-war, post-Second World War in the 50s, the San Gabriel Valley was one of the first places where the racial restriction laws on who could buy property or who could own property were a little bit more lax. And so it was the first place in Los Angeles County where Asians and Latinos could buy property. And so, eventually, that's where my grandparents were able to buy a home. And there's like a big Taiwanese diaspora in the San Gabriel Valley. But in San Gabriel itself is actually this building, which is a mission. And this building has been here since 1776 or 1779 or 71. Anyway, in the 1770s, this building was erected by the Spanish who colonized California. And in my work, I'm really interested in basically the legacy of colonialism and how that's, affected people of color all over the world. So this site is essentially the first site in California on our land, mine, I guess, that is a model of a mass incarceration system, of a prison system, because the Spanish, the friars and the missionaries were, and the priests, basically enslaved the indigenous people of this area to work in the missions. Which brings me to my work, as a child of immigrants who grew up in San Gabriel, how do I reckon with this grave history? And how do I live among and be responsible to this history and to the gravities of this land? And I was connected to an elder, a Tongva elder, and the Tongva are one of the indigenous groups of the LA Basin, in addition to the Tataviam and the Chumash. And so Julia Bogany is an elder that I work with. This is her. And we work together in creative and in teaching capacities. And her great-grandmother passed through the mission. And so it was really important for me to sort of make this connection. And to begin a sort of open relationship with her, an open-ended relationship with her. And her work as a cultural ambassador for her tribe centers on the question, or the quote, "I always say Tongva women never left their ancestral homeland. They just became invisible. How do we make ourselves not invisible?" is the question I ask every day. And so in different ways, I feel like art can provide, temporary solutions to her question, and working together in collaboration with accountability and responsibility can provide can provide solutions as well. Although I don't want to say like solutions as in, oh, you do it and then you finish this project and then you don't have anything to do anymore. But a sort of ongoing, ever evolving thing, or relationship to one another, relationship to change, to place, etc. And so this is the actual earth from the mission that I installed on this Hakka fabric, which I think a lot of our Taiwanese friends would already immediately recognize. And a lot of my work has a lot of longing and myth making and magic, and transformation and mutation. So these are my hands caught within a cotton warp. I should say that this structure here is a Navajo loom, and that's something that I also practice. I'm apprenticed to a 4th generation Navajo weaver, but I'm not going to talk so much about that in this presentation. But I'm interested essentially in how different crafts and different textiles and the materials that make those textiles or make those crafts speak to legacies of loss and legacies of transformation, and how, Navajo weaving, my work with Julia, with the Tongva community, my parent immigrant background, all this stuff, how do they, form a relationship to one another and to place and to placemaking and to connections. So my third question is think about a grandparent or an ancestor. Your ancestor can be real or imagined. What is your connection to them? What is their spirit like? So I don't know my ancestors. So I imagine them to be blue. I don't know why, but I started painting blue figures like in 2015 without really like any sort of understanding of concrete, like lingual understanding of why, but I just kept painting blue things. And over the years, my relationship to blue, the color and the substance has really changed and transformed into many different things. As you can see here, there are also blue hands coming out of the tree. So blue is sort of like a spirit. And then it brings me to my learning Atayal weaving, which is an indigenous Taiwanese weaving. And I'm interested, my parents are from Taiwan, and they are of a settler class. And so again, same questions, like how do you live in kinship with other people and, acknowledge whose land we're on and whose, how to interact with people as guests, who were the traditional stewards of this land and who continue to be the stewards of this land and whose futures should we center. One way for me as an artist to do this is to really get close to the material, which is weaving. And this is Miss Saigrin, and she's in the Ulai Mountains outside of Taipei, which is where I learned to weave. And then I made this work sort of based on that experience and based on my research, because weaving, gave the Atayal sustenance, but during colonization from Japan, weaving was banned. And when you take one, central tenet out of a society, the entire society basically crashes. Not to say that there's not resilience, but essentially indigenous labor was used for colonial plantations, productions of camphor and rice, among other things. But I was really interested in the camphor because camphor, you can produce gunpowder and you can produce celluloid, which is the world's first thermoplastic. And because I was trying to link the idea of because weaving was banned, indigenous labor was sent to the plantations to produce camphor. And celluloid was, used as film in the early 20th century in Hollywood, and which was during a time of westward expansion. A lot of Westerns were shot on these celluloid films. So our American understanding of cowboys and Indians really, come from like basically the landscape of Taiwan is compacted and compressed onto, how we imagine the West to be. These ideas of, a barren landscape, the ideas of killing Indians, the ideas of, genociding Indians so that essentially white people could take over the U.S. These are related to, how is this related to the camphor tree? Well, it's in the actual material of the film. And how does this relate to the banning of indigenous weaving across the Pacific? Well, it's related. It's within the materiality of the film itself. And so this is camphor paper that I made and pooled on my own. I like to make paper out of plants sometimes. I also embroider, and what else can I tell you? Oh, this is indigo dyed from, again, the same pot. This is the Neijing tool, which is a Taoist diagram showing the sort of interconnectedness of human and non-human, or more than human, and landscape, using myth and poetry and philosophy and figuration. And I was really interested in this image. I like making clothes, although I didn't make these clothes, I just designed them, and then I worked with a seamstress to sort of manifest that. This is a book that I love, but if it is possible, then perhaps a larger sense of who we are as interconnected ecological, cultural, and historical beings could begin to grow. For if the health of the land is its capacity for self-renewal, then the health of the human family could, in part, be an intergenerational capacity for locating ourselves within many inheritances as citizens of the land, of nations, even within the nation, and of the earth. I just realized my closed captioning was off this whole time. I'm so sorry about that. These are some books that I'm working through. And going back to Julia's idea of, how do you make Tongva women not invisible so that her great-granddaughter doesn't have to ask that question? I was given this great opportunity to install these murals on the campus of Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is in Carson, California. And so this is the first thing that you see when you walk up to the student housing complex there. And it is a big reminder, of not only whose land we're on, but whose future, to consider and to center, because, Indigenous people are still here. And what, can we all do together to ensure each other's future in this crazy time, in this urgent time of global climate change. So there's my presentation.
Thank you. I have so much to respond, but we should ask people now. This is not talk anymore, so we should. How can we? Should we give feedback by turns to those questions?
We said at the end, no?
I think if you want to give opinion, we can just speak up.
Oh, thank you everybody for your comments. I just saw them.